Now then, James, the peg's ready to fish. I'm very, very eager, but obviously I need to get my rod sorted. I have to admit, I've been into quite a few tackle shops and I'm daunted by all the different rods that I see. A match, a feeder, a specimen. I just need some help. What's the difference between the rods, James?
Well, you are right, Andy, and it is quite bewildering. There's so many different styles of rods on the market. What we've done is we've simplified it down to 4 different specific types for coarse fishing. Okay, so the first one to look at is a standard match rod. Okay, now the match rod is used for fishing typically with a match style float, so a waggler. And match rods are quite lightweight and they've got a nice soft action. So they're kind of a universal rod for float fishing on lakes.
What sort of length would you go for?
Well, that's a good question. From about 10 foot being the shortest length for absolute beginners, juniors, fishing close in, to maybe a 13 foot for fishing at range. So the length of the rod will dictate how far out you're fishing. The longer the rod, the further out you're fishing.
Brilliant. Okay.
Second one to talk about is a feeder or quiver tip rod. Now these are specifically designed for ledgering and feeder fishing. The giveaway is the soft quiver tip at the top. Now the quiver tip is what registers the bite when you're ledgering. So the tip needs to be quite sensitive.
Now I do have a question about these. I go into the shops and I always see these different tips.
Yeah.
What are they all for?
Well, actually, nearly all quiver tip rods are supplied with more than one tip. And that's to allow the rod to be used in different conditions. You want to be using as sensitive tip as possible. But sometimes they're too sensitive. If you're fishing for big fish or casting heavy leads or feeders, the tip's going to be too sensitive. So you need to use a stiffer tip. Also, if it's windy, a soft tip is going to get affected badly by the wind buffering against it, and you'll get false bites. So in those conditions you need a stiffer tip. And also, if there's a significant tow on the water, you need a stiffer tip to be able to register the bites. So it makes quite simple sense really, and that's why most of our feeder rods and quiver tip rods are supplied with at least 2 or 3 spare tips.
Thanks, James.
The next rod to look at is a specialist rod. Now these have become very popular over the years, starting off as a standard Avon rod, which is basically a very, very versatile rod. It means that actually you can float fish with it and you can ledger with it because it's got a screw tip that will accommodate a screw-in type of quiver tip, but also it's got a standard top that will allow you to float fish or even ledger with a heavier lead for bigger fish. So the specialist rod's a very good rod and probably what you'd choose if you could only afford one rod for coarse fishing on lakes. Okay. The last rod is more specialised. Now this is actually a standard carp rod. So this is for people that are specimen carp fishing, targeting bigger fish and waiting for a bite. So they're not going to be holding the rod all day, so the rod's heavier in weight, it's also heavier in action.
I've got a question to ask about these. I've been looking at these and I noticed test curves on them, 2.5 pounds,
Yeah.
3 pounds.
The test curve,
what's the
that's all
difference?
related to the power of the rod. The lightest carp rods are around about 1.75 pound test curve, up to 3.5 or even stronger for heavy fishing situations. So the test curve relates to the power of the rod. As a general rule for carp fishing on lakes such as this, 2.5 pound test curve is absolutely adequate. You don't want the rod to be too powerful. You want it to be powerful enough to handle the fish, but not too powerful to pull out a fish and lose fish. So, Andy, that's a brief summary on rods. We're now going to fix a reel on, and we're going to set the rod up and show you the absolute basics of how you set up.
Brilliant, let's get cracking. Now I'm hooked on fishing.